I will tell you a funny story. I don't know if this will get me ever fired, but my wife hates this one, and I probably shouldn't say it publicly, but I'll take.
Hey everyone, welcome to DevOps Roundup.
Today we're going to be talking about the top 5 interviewing tips if you're trying to get a job as a DevOps ideal person. Because Sean doesn't
Ideal.
like Sean does not like the word
If,
DevOps.
if, if you're interviewing for a DevOps position,
There we go.
here's the top five, and these
Tip.
are going to be good for whatever you're interviewing for. But we're trying to put a DevOps spin on it.
Yes. So Sean, why don't you kick us off with your number one? And the other thing that we should say about this is maybe this becomes 10 tips because I think you should give me your number one, and I'll give you my number one, and then we go and see if our numbers align. Because just in our little recon for this episode, I don't my 5 were very different than your 5.
Yeah, and I'm not sure my five are ranked, from best to worst on the
Oh,
top five. There are five good
good tip.
interview tips, but I guess if I had to start with one, uh, I would say be prepared to give real world examples to questions. So if I was to ask you, like, what's the most difficult problem that you had solved in a DevOps scenario, I would expect you to have a good example locked and loaded. So don't walk into the interview without expecting open-ended questions where you should be driving the conversation to be able to explain a difficult problem and how you overcame it.
Right.
And
And how much of a fan are you? Because this does kind of overlap with one of my tips about the STAR method. Are you familiar with STAR? You should be pretty sure you're familiar with STAR. No?
remind me.
The STAR method is the situation. Okay.
Mhm.
The S is situation. So what was going on? Tell me, like, paint the picture. Like, bring me to that moment in time,
Mhm.
right? Don't just tell me, oh, one time I fixed the problem, right? Like, one time we're under the pressure, we had a deadline in a week, right? Stakes were high. Like, you're painting the
Yes.
situation. 2, the task. What were you doing? Like, what were you supposed to do? What was your
Mhm.
duty, right? Like, what was your part of that picture, of that
Mhm.
puzzle? Then the action, right? Like, what is the impactful thing that you did, right?
Mhm.
Because your responsibility is one part of it, but then, like, here's the Hail Mary that I threw, right?
Uh-huh.
Right. That very actionable, valuable, like, this thing would have catastrophically failed had I not done this thing. And then the result is, well, what was the outcome, which is usually, the
Mhm.
resolution, the third act, if you will, in a typical story.
Yeah. So basically, the framework for the majority of a talk at a conference.
Yeah. So sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but proceed with yours. But I'm assuming you're a fan of the STAR method, then, to a certain
Yes.
degree.
Yeah. So, but basically, when I ask an open-ended question like, describe one of the more troublesome problems you solved in DevOps, I don't expect the deer in the headlights.
Mm,
What I expect is, do you have a story or two locked and loaded for that particular type of
yeah.
question?
And so I'll piggyback off of this one because this is one of my top tips. Is what I've done in the past, especially with these open-ended questions. Research these open-ended questions. They're not always going to be the same, but
No,
there's truth to every
they're
open-ended
in
question.
patterns.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a pattern.
Yeah.
And so what I've done in the past is I've kind of gone through my resume. So know your resume, right? Know what's on there because
Oh
anything on
yeah,
the resume is open game.
that's a completely different tip,
There's
and
different tip. Okay.
probably if I went back to ranking them, that it didn't show up in my list, but that's probably the best advice on going into an interview. Understand what's on your resume. If you put something on your resume, it's fair game for questions
Yeah.
from the interviewer. Um,
Yeah. So what I've done then, right, is like I know all the bullets that I have on my resume, the valuable things that I've added on there. And then what I'm doing is I have with sticky notes, like I have like a almost like an Excel file on a wall of like, here's the different types of potential questions, scenario where something was super challenging, a scenario where you had to save the day, here's a scenario where you were the best, right? Like all the different types of open-ended questions that would normally be asked for. and then I kind of have my bullets and my stories, and I have a whole story, right? It's not just like here's the answer, here's like a 10-second answer, but I have like a good like here's all the characters that were in the story, here's my role, here's what I did, and so I have all those kind of already done, so I can kind of mix and match to help answer the questions. Because showing up to the interview and not knowing your own life story is a deer
is
in
a problem.
headlights.
Yeah, that's a huge red flag.
Yeah, especially
For
because
forgetting what
then
you did at all these, all your previous companies, it kind of makes me feel like you weren't there,
or you didn't
or
do them.
you're embellished your resume.
Yeah. I will tell you a funny story. I don't know if this will get me ever fired, but my wife hates this one and I probably shouldn't say it publicly, but I'll take credit for it. And I love to tell this story, but my wife worked on an autonomous lawnmower in college. Okay.
Okay.
She worked on this autonomous lawnmower. I assisted a lot.
Okay.
And it's such a great story. That's the story that I always use. And my wife's like, you never actually worked on the robot. I'm like, but I was there and I was like helping. But it wasn't like, she's like, but you weren't on the team. I'm like, but I helped. And she hates it when I use that story in my interviews because it's such a great story of like overcoming challenges because the dumb robot ended up not knowing how to cut grass. It was a autonomous lawnmower.
The main thing it was supposed to
Yeah,
do.
the main thing I was supposed to do. So anyway, so yeah, be like it's easier to defend and converse and articulate the story when you were actually in the story.
Yes.
So don't make up stories.
And don't make up. Oh yeah, because a lot of times it's easy to find people that are making up the story, because they're usually borrowing. Yeah, and so they're they've borrowed their made up story from someone else. Very few people are going to completely make a story up
Yeah.
out of whole cloth.
You know who will not let you make up a story? Meta. Have you ever interviewed at Meta?
No, I have not.
Dude, Meta
I
interviews,
don't want to.
yeah, they're hard. I did one. Meta interviews are tough because they go deep. Like you can't fake anything. Like they will ask you if you're talking about a solution that you made, and like let's just say I had to choose between Bitbucket and GitHub for something, right? That was a question. They're gonna ask me like, what was your criteria for Bitbucket? What was your criteria for GitHub? Which one made you tip one way? Why was that so important? What was the value that your other team saw for that one? And how did you defend it with the rest of the team? And did you have anybody that challenged that one? And they make you go so deep that unless you lived it and unless you actually did it, there's no way in how you can fake it.
Yeah, you can't fake your way through that. That is one of the tactics I use when I interview people. Is after I just keep digging deeper. I just keep asking why,
Yeah.
and how many layers can we go down before they can't answer that particular one. Well, it's also how many more levels of why before they're annoyed at that question.
I usually like to go 5 levels of why.
Yeah. Well, isn't that the
that'll be our
levels?
yeah. So that'll be our combined number one. I think if I had articulated from mine, it's know your resume inside and out. But you said you probably had it differently, but that would be mine. Like just have stories, right? Have good answers and set them up in that STAR method that I showed you, right? Because not all interview questions are going to be like, here, build this thing, right? They're going to be, how did you tell me a time where you had to build something that you had no idea what you were building?
Yeah, when I interview, I prefer to ask questions like that than point someone to a whiteboard and say, "Hey, create me a bubble sort."
Yeah.
I
If anybody ever wants to interview and ask me, tell me about a time where your documentation to restore the system was on the system that went down. I got a great story for you. All right, so that's tip number 1. Let's move on to tip number 2.
Okay.
What do you got?
So my tip number 2 is since you're interviewing for a DevOps position, be able to articulate the entire DevOps solution end to end. Don't focus on just what you did at your previous job. Be able to convey that you have complete understanding of all the disciplines. You don't necessarily have to have deep knowledge or experience in like program management if you mainly were working on observability or something, but you need to know why it's part of DevOps and all that.
100%. Yeah, and I'll take it a step further with my number 2, which is kind of like know your master your core concepts, but not just your core, but like the core DevOps concepts, right? Like you should be able to articulate the entire infinite loop and know common things like what's a SaaS. Like if you don't know what a SaaS is, like,
Yeah.
right, common, like super, like if you don't know that your team's Scrum, like if you don't know that your development team's on a Scrum team, like, and you don't know what Scrum is or Agile,
Mhm.
that may not have anything to do with building a Kubernetes cluster, but you
Yeah.
should still know that some person in the life cycle that you're participating in does something in that other realm.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect someone. So if someone came in the door and they were a Kubernetes expert, I would expect them to understand those concepts, understand program management, SaaS, DAS, and things like that. But I wouldn't be asking them questions on how to implement that
Yeah,
during the interview.
absolutely.
But
But you should know how. You should know, like
what
these
they
are
are.
your building blocks,
Mhm.
right? And you should know the basics and the super easy concepts of, again, I just even at a high level. But
Yeah.
what you shouldn't do, and maybe there's a pro bonus tip, if you don't know, don't make it up. Let them know I don't know. I rather take an I don't know than a Scrum is this thing that we do in football.
I prefer people not to ad lib during
Yeah.
interviews. I do like the I don't know, but followed with this is how I would find out. So,
I think that's really critical. I was mentoring a cousin of mine recently, and he had been asked, "Do you know how to do this?" And he's like, "I've never done that in my life."
mhm.
Stop the conversation there. I'm like,
Yeah.
"Well, that was probably not a good idea." He's like, "But I don't want to lie." I'm like, "You don't have to lie, but you would tell him, here's how I would learn that thing."
Yes. Yeah, that's what I prefer to hear when I have a consultant say, "Hey, I've never done this before."
I would
That's
either,
not what I want to hear.
yeah.
I want to hear, okay, this is my approach and how I would become competent at doing
And
that.
I would probably even pull a similar story or similar scenario where I'm like, "Hey, I had no idea what a team managed project was in Jira. I
Mhm.
was in a similar situation. I had no idea. I tried Googling, nothing came back. So here's what I did. And here's, I went and got this book, or I found an online class, or I asked my coworkers, or I
Yeah.
attended a brown bag. Like anything is better than I've
I
never done it.
complained
Sorry.
about it on a podcast. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, anything is better than freezing up and going like, yeah, I don't know. I used to have a coworker. She used to drive me up a wall. Anytime she had to do something that she had no
Mhm.
idea how to do, she's like, I never took a class on that. And I'm like, so? So that's the end of
Yeah.
the story?
Yeah.
So I'd ask her, like, hey, can you do this? And she's like, no, I never took a class on that.
Yeah.
I'm
That
like, well,
I run into that a lot at some of my customer sites, that their full-time employees have that type of mentality. Unless they were trained or went through some sort of course, that they're not going to do that because it's either not part of their job description or no one trained them on that. Um, but to get off that negative train, at some point, none of us knew what we know now. So it's okay not to know stuff, but to have a way to plan on how to learn is key. So if you're like, oh, I've never been trained, I've never been asked to, I've never done that before, is a complete, turn off. And if I say that in front of a client, client's not going to want to hire me for my expertise because they want to hire someone who's already done this. However,
it's
whoever,
impossible to have done everything.
yeah, no one has done everything. And the person that you hired that has already done this at one point hadn't done it, and they figure it out. So you're really looking for people who can figure things out. Because if I do an interview and I ask them all sorts of deep questions about, let's say, GitHub. Um, okay, they know GitHub today. How do I know they'll know GitHub in a year? Because GitHub's going to change. They're going to add features. They're going to, probably acquire a company and add something to, they may finally merge with ADO. Um, you know, how is that person going to be able to adapt and know GitLab in the future? So it's very important that you don't give the I've never done that. And a lot of people's excuse is exactly like your cousin's excuse or your nephew. I can't remember which one you said, but
I hit
um,
everything at this point.
okay.
Cousin, but yeah.
Is they think they're lying if they don't say they've never done it. You know, like it's okay to say, yeah, I've not done that particular thing before, but this is how I would figure it out. Um,
Yeah, my personal preference is to show an example of how I hit a similar adversary and how I solved that adversary. Not necessarily how I solved this particular problem you're asking me about, but I was faced with that exact same challenge and I didn't let it stop me. And here's a proof that I actually have something tangible to show.
I like that approach. You do need to be careful though. If you're good at doing that and not, because that also could raise a red flag with the interviewer. Um, when people don't answer the question I'm asking.
Yeah, so that you would want to be very careful, right? You want to keep it very relevant and just say, "Look, I
Yeah.
don't like if you ask me to set you up a GitHub action, something I haven't done, I'd be like,
Mhm.
I've never done a GitHub action, but I've set up pipelines in Bitbucket, but I didn't know how to do them at one point, and like this is the step that I took to set up Bitbucket pipeline. So I'd be able to take a lot of those lessons learned to learn an approach to get the action do
Yeah.
get an action configured.
Well, that's a good example of a good segue. When someone
But
asks you that and you pivot, you still answer the question, but you're answering it in a different tool
yeah.
set or explaining your learning approach.
So
Um,
I think that one though I'm gonna add a top interviewing tip that it's not on my list, but I think I'd like to pivot to number 3. If you're okay.
okay, sure. So, release team, DevOps tool specialists. We provide professional services and software reselling around the leading software DevOps tools like Atlassian, GitLab, GitHub, JFrog, and others. To talk with us about DevOps, here's our contact information. Please call 866-887-0489 or via email at info@releaseteam.com.
But number 3 would be interview a lot because the only way to do what I just did, where I just described that I
Mhm.
pivoted, is to feel comfortable in the interview.
Yeah.
And so if you're doing one interview a year or if you haven't
Yeah.
interviewed in 10 years, this is what I was. So in an earlier episode, I told Sean, like, clearly you haven't interviewed in a very long time,
Wasn't
right?
that part of this interview?
No, it was the last episode where
Oh,
yeah, it's one of those last episodes. And so I would interview for the sake of interviewing just to practice. I did 18 rounds at Google in 2022.
okay.
I feel after that, I felt like I could take on the world. I'm like, throw any interview at me. Like I have mastered interviewing because I survived 18 rounds at Google and actually got the job at Google.
Yeah. I mostly agree with your advice. I do think practice, is good.
Yeah, like
Um,
even if it's not real, like a mock interview, like those are great. Colleges do
Mock
that.
interviews are great. The only reason I don't agree 100% is you don't want to be wasting the interviewer's time. So since I'm normally the
The
interviewer,
interviewer.
not the interviewee,
All right,
I
we'll
don't like my
rephrase it.
time
We will
wasted.
rephrase it. Mock interview religiously.
Yeah.
There you go.
And
Treat the real interviews like real interviews.
however, I do think it's worthwhile to do some interviews out there, even if you're not 100% ready to make a job change, because it practice makes perfect, which is one of that. But you'll never know when the next job comes in, and it might not be when you were thinking of making a job move. And
Hop.
so I definitely would recommend that every so often throw yourself out there and see what opportunities come up.
Just be
You
careful with
never.
poaching because we don't like poaching, right, Sean?
Well, that's not poaching. That's putting yourself out there. Poaching is when another competitor of yours or
All right,
a headhunter.
let me rephrase.
Uh,
Be careful when you're being poached. Then
yes, be careful when you're being poached. So,
alliance and loyalty it still has some value in today's society.
I would hope it does. I'm not sure that displaying loyalty is probably a top five.
Probably not, but maybe we do have an episode in the future. I think that would be a great one. Like, should you be loyal to your companies as a general thing, right? Because the times are changing so much that
Yeah.
I missed the telling when I got my very first job. I was exactly like 6 months too late to a pension.
Hmm.
And when you had these pensions, like your loyalty, as much as you hated your job,
Yeah.
you were loyal because
The
they were going to
pension.
take care of you when you retired.
Yeah. And pensions disappeared in the
Yeah.
90s and
So,
early
so we might
2000s.
talk about that one a little bit later in a future episode of like things to watch out for. Like what would want to make you be loyal? Like maybe signs for this is where you should
Yeah, I
sink your
think
boots
that's a
into.
good topic for
Future episode.
another
Yeah.
episode because it's a story that I've heard over and over again throughout my entire career that things have changed and companies, but I would, yeah, well, I'll save it for another.
We'll save it for
Yeah.
another one, but hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out. All right, so yeah, so the third one was practice. Like, let's just generalize it as practice, and preferably with mock interviews. Maybe use AI to help you um, coach a little bit. But call like my cousin literally calls me, and we run through maybe an hour worth of interviews before they do the real interview, and I'm
Oh,
putting
cool.
them through the ringer just to kind of
Mhm.
help them get into uncomfortable spots. Because the last thing you want to do is like freeze. You don't want to freeze. You don't want to be that
Mhm.
deer in headlights.
Yeah.
And
Well, that
and you
goes back to having things locked and loaded.
yeah.
So have a number of things locked and loaded before you go into your interview. So if you happen to get, blindsided and they ask you something that you have a to at least avoid dead space.
Yeah, but
Um,
I've had friends that I've mocked interviewed with, like just kind of like rat like a little what do you call it in tennis? Volley, a little volley,
sure.
right? Like we volleyed in the interviews,
Uh-huh.
and I think it's so beneficial, right? Because especially when you do it with a coworker, I think there's a lot of value because you sometimes don't appreciate the things that you bring to the table because self-aware worth and self-awareness is kind of
Yeah.
hard, but it's
Mhm.
very easy for me to say, wait, you've done this awesome project that you really knocked it out of the park, like
Yeah.
that should be on your resume or that should be
Yeah.
something you talk about,
Yeah.
and you might just not know them, but
Well,
practice.
yeah, we could probably have an episode about resume tips as well. But yeah, I have helped people write resumes, you know, a lot over my years, and there's so many people that sell themselves short on their resume. They basically just said, I supported Jira. Well, that should be expanded into a couple paragraphs. What
You-
does it mean to support Jira? What skills did you bring to
yeah,
the table to do
I,
that?
w- I wonder
Uh,
if I should add to my resume ex-Googler because I was a Google employee for like a day.
per day. Oh, that should be an interesting story. But
The time that I went through 18 rounds of interviews over an 18-month period and then walked away from my dream job. That'll be an episode.
yeah,
All right, let's move on to number 4 since we have less than 10 minutes here.
all right.
What's your
So
number 4? I
my
got
my
a couple.
number four is be prepared uh, to do a programming or a whiteboard challenge. These are more and more common. I used to like to just say no to these things if if it was a prereq to an interview. Um, but some jobs are going to insist that you throw some code up on a whiteboard. They're going to ask you some sort of question about how would you configure this in Terraform, and they're expecting something off the top of your head that's semi
Legible.
correct,
Yeah.
legible, or they're probably
Functional.
not going to be nitpicky about syntax or anything like that.
But
But
the
if
general pseudocode of it,
yeah, you'd
like
be able to knock
like
out
check.
pseudocode.
Yeah, you should have some if clauses in there, some
Mhm.
else statements, right? Like some loops to like here's what we're doing, here's what we're I
Yeah.
think as a DevOps person though, like scripting is totally on the table. I wouldn't
Mhm.
be expecting you to know what a hash table is in like Java or something. I don't even know if Java has hash tables, but I wouldn't be, I wouldn't be expecting you to know that level of deepness. But at the scripting level, like I would expect you. I'm assuming as a DevOps person, you've written a script or two.
Yeah. Well, if you have Python listed as a skill on your resume, expect to be asked a Python,
Question.
uh, you know, yeah,
Question.
a challenge. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's anything on your resume, folks. It's fair game, right? And so again, if you haven't coded, right, if you haven't scripted, you're not that comfortable with scripting, I probably wouldn't add it to that resume. And if you are going to be applying to a job that requires you to script, you probably should know how to do the scripting.
Yes, you definitely should. Now there's ways that you can incorporate the "I don't know" answer into scripting challenges. But basically, I know a lot of programming languages. I wouldn't be very comfortable actually programming in any of them. But I could open up the majority of programming languages and tell you what it's doing, and manipulate it to do something different. But would I be comfortable writing something from scratch? Probably not, unless it's in Perl or
Right.
Python or Bash or something. But if you ask me to write something from scratch in Rust during an interview, I'm going to say this is how I would approach it, but not actually be able to write anything more than pseudocode, which may or may not be Rust correct.
Right. But the logic should be there, right? You should be able to logically think through a coding problem.
Yeah.
And so again, whether you know the syntax or not, or whether you get the mechanics exactly 100%, I'd be less concerned. I know if you were applying for be a software engineer, 100%, you better know your syntax a little bit better. But as a DevOps, like I think that this coding is a little bit more high level than it is if you're
Yeah.
applying for a straight vanilla software engineering position.
I rarely ask people to do a whiteboard challenge or a coding part during an interview, but when I do, I will I will give a lot of kudos to the people that will pick apart my question rather than just jump to the whiteboard and start
Well,
coming up with a solution. And so if I ask for them to solve something using Python, and they turn around like, well, I probably wouldn't do this in Python because I could do this in
Ruby or something.
Ruby or there's a tool that does that, so I wouldn't script it.
Yeah, or a
So
function that you just call.
yeah, I would basically call this API for this tool if it was available.
Yeah. And
Instead of
that's an interesting thing. You can barely see it here. It says lime colored book in my thing.
yeah.
I don't know if you've ever heard of cracking the coding interview. It's one of the like de
No.
facto. It's like the Bible for software engineering coding
Okay.
interviews.
Well, that's a
And
tip. Get that too. Yeah.
yeah, get cracking the coding interview. But anyways, so the very first thing is like you don't the very first step there is don't answer the question. Like fight your intuition to answer every question that's given to you,
Mhm.
right? Because a great example that Microsoft used to do back in the day, and I think I've asked you, Sean, right? Is like how many manholes are in a city,
Oh yeah, we've talked
right?
about this. Yeah.
And you like if you were just to tackle that answer, like it can be 1,000, it can be 10,000, it can be 100,000, right? Like
Yeah.
what city are we talking about?
Yeah.
Is this like Radiator Springs? Because there's like one, right? Or are we talking about New York City where there's like one in every block,
Yeah.
right? But now you can start defining the scope of the question
Mhm.
so that you can eventually get to an answer.
Yeah.
Right. And I think a lot of people just are again so nervous, they're just
Yeah.
excited or
Well,
just
yeah,
scared.
questions like that are designed to understand your thought
Well,
process.
even with programming, right? Like if I were to say, write me a script to build this pipeline,
Mhm.
you'd be like, well, are we pushing to a cloud environment? Are we
Yeah.
pushing to an on-prem? Because that's going to alter the solution,
Mhm.
right? Do we have
Yeah.
unlimited resources or are we worried about time or build minutes, right? That's going to alter your
Yeah.
solution.
Oh, so basically, what you're saying is you should have multiple ways of saying it depends.
Yes.
So it depends is a very good answer. And it's my go-to answer when I'm doing consulting work because it always does. There is no best practice that covers everybody. In fact, this came up in the Jira Life yesterday, or at least I commented on it. I can't remember the context, but um, but yeah, it
Yeah, I remember I said
depends.
something you wrote, it depends. I remember that comment from you. Yeah. All right.
Um,
And then the last one, let's just get to number 5. What's your number 5?
so earlier we said DevOps tools, know everything, know the concepts behind everything. Don't need to be deep in any particular on all of them. But you do need to be deep in a
What?
couple of
Yeah,
them.
that,
And
that was gonna be. Somehow we ended up with the same ones. I think you were looking at my screen.
you
Yeah, I
need
have a
to,
deep dive into containerization and orchestration. If you're going for a Kubernetes spot,
yeah,
you
you
better
need
know
to have
Kubernetes.
exactly. But
Maybe you don't need to know Jira or Bitbucket as much, but if you're going for an Atlassian spot, you better know how to do Atlassian.
if you're going for security, you should know the security tools, and you should have some depth in a handful of them. If it's a version control tool, you should be, these days it has to be Git, but you should be able to answer any Git type of questions, and the more advanced Git questions. You need to show your depth in your area of
Yeah,
expertise.
and you're reasoning and logic as well, right?
Mhm,
Because again, there's cost efficient ways to do things. There's non cost efficient ways.
mhm.
There's just a lot of different ways to skin the cat. So you want to make sure you're asking those clarifying questions, but also come with intimate knowledge of a stack, and preferably the stack that you're applying to.
Yeah, hopefully.
Hopefully. Fingers crossed. One can only hope. But yeah, those are our top 5 interviewing tips. Hopefully you got some value out of our perspectives, and definitely I think it's always a blessing to be able to be listening to someone who actively sits on the other side of the table. Because oftentimes as listeners, we're always on this side of the table trying to interview, but
Mhm.
it's rare when you get to see from the perspective of I'm the one that hires people,
Yeah.
and here's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah,
Maybe
comments.
yeah, comment your tips that you would add, and
Yeah,
comment if you've ever used any of these tips to save your CYA.
yeah.
And while you're down there, make sure you hit that subscribe button.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.